Throughout the years, I've used a lot of different devices, and most of them come down to devices you know quite well, like for instance Samsung devices or for instance OnePlus. But some other brands are quite ignored when it comes to the review space and just the general impression when it comes to devices. Well, today we have one of those. This is the Motorola G100, and this is quite an interesting device, especially because of that Snapdragon 870 inside. Anyway, let's dive into the review of the Motorola G100 and see what this device is all about, and actually also talk about a very useful feature for the macro camera. Either way, let's jump into the video. So, as stated, this is the Motorola G100. Now, as also stated, this is a phone that is ignored quite a lot. But with that being said, should it? Well, let's discuss that in this overall review. One thing that I will straight away have to say is that the 870 inside, as stated before, it's a really solid chip and shouldn't be looked past. Even if it's from a brand you don't normally buy from, this is actually a really solid performer when it comes to that CPU. So let's start with something that I often care about a lot, and that is the camera. For myself, I really do care about the performance of a camera. I don't want something that looks over-processed or something that just doesn't look right. Now of course, this comes with 4 cameras, and you think, it probably comes with that weird macro and depth sensor. Well, granted, the depth sensor, yes, but the macro on this one is actually really solid. The macro on this one actually has a special flash around it. This means that for the macro itself, you get a much better image because macro needs proper light. It's so close to the object and often light just doesn't reach that well if you have an object in front of it. Having a separate LED for that is really useful. It glows around the camera, but it's really useful to have. And overall, images on this device isn't bad at all. Yes, in low light it cannot compete with a lot of devices out there, especially flagships. But in day-to-day life, I think the images look clear. It doesn't go for the oversaturation, and for myself, I prefer that. I like the approach that Motorola does here with the camera. So well done in terms of that. But as stated, it's of course not gonna compete with a lot of flagships out there or some phones that are trying to be more of an all-rounder for the same about price. Now to continue a little bit more about the camera, even though I feel like this phone isn't necessarily a camera focused phone of course, mainly a CPU focused phone, I do have to say some features that exist on this phone. For instance, audio zoom. This isn't something new, I've seen it before, but what matters is the result. And while indeed if you zoom in you hear the audio better, it results in a bit of a weird effect. Almost sounds like some noise cancelling thing going around it, so it doesn't sound natural as you can tell. In terms of auto video recording, it can record videos up to 6K and 30 frames per second. The result, however, while being in a higher resolution, is also a video that is quite shaky. In 4K it is a lot more stable, but also it is a bit focus hunting sometimes, resulting in sometimes having a slight color shift as well. Overall though, apart from video recording, the camera performance is pretty nice for a phone that isn't focused about the camera itself. Because again, like the Poco F3 and the Realme GT 5G, the focus is more towards the flagship CPU performance. But it's good to know with stills it still has your back with some solid shots. But seeing how we are talking about focus, let's focus on the performance where it comes to the CPU, the day-to-day experience, how well it handles games, and of course battery life as well. And well, let's start with the latter, battery life. Now the Moto G100 isn't a small phone, and it does mean that you have a large 5000 mAh battery inside. The battery life itself makes me last through the day easily. If I could, I would probably push it to 1.5 days, but honestly I always charge my phone at the end of the day. So then the performance, the CPU and how well it does. Well, myself, I've never been about numbers. It's something that we can heavily focus on, forgetting that a number doesn't decide how well something performs in day-to-day life. Like for instance, strong numbers at a camera resolution doesn't make it by default better. While with the CPU it is a bit more simple and it can give somewhat of an indication, it doesn't by default tell you the full story. Experience is what matters, and in that way the Moto G100 does well. It runs games that I've played smoothly. No hiccups and no real heat coming from the device as well. It keeps it pretty cool and it runs consistent with games like Wheel Racing 3, the biggest money grab there is, and of course Call of Duty, PUBG and so much more. They all run smoothly and I haven't experienced any issues at all. The same goes for multitasking, but honestly that hasn't been a problem for a long time. The Snapdragon 870, as stated before in the review, is a really good CPU and it performs really well here again. And then the Moto G100 can come with a special package, that is for instance a proper USB-C to a full HDMI port. This allows you to use your phone as somewhat like a PC, but also for easy media consumption like video chatting and gaming. This could be very useful if you want for instance to have your different media shown on a much larger display, or somewhat use it as a PC. When you do use it as your PC, your phone screen basically works as a mouse. However, of course, using that as your mouse isn't as natural as a proper mouse, but it still works well and it's quite easy to get used to. So the Motorola G100, what do I think at the end about the device? Honestly, I'm quite surprised by it. I think it did really well in most of the things that are thrown at it. There are some parts where I think it could do better. For instance, a simple thing, but screenshot, if you take one, you cannot do anything like sliding down. You just have to press once on the screen and then you can do something again. It's somehow locked, I don't know why, but that's something about the software where I'm like, I'm not used to that. I don't find that really useful. But apart from that, the software experience is really good. It's smooth, it runs through everything properly, and as stated, the CPU inside this thing is done really well. It comes with some features that are very useful for a lot of people and should be standard in your phone and with your phone. It comes with a charger, a 20-watt charger, it comes with a 3.5mm headphone jack, and it does come with the micro SD support that a lot of phones seem to ditch as well for some reason. And no, the micro SD isn't used for the speed of it. It's used to simply quickly switch between different mediums, but also have your music on it, your images that you just have as a backup. It's really simple and you don't need like an online cloud for it, but it's really useful to have a micro SD inside your phone. Something that a lot of phones sadly have been dropping more and more. At the end, the Moto G100, if you want something that does well in CPU performance, if you want something that performs in your day-to-day life well with battery life, in terms of screen does pretty well as well, gets pretty bright, I think the Moto G100 does really well here. Where does it stand as a phone? I think if I compare it to, for instance, the Realme GT 5G and of course the Poco F3 that feel like they have the same approach, I would put it slightly above the Poco F3. This comes because of the software experience and of course the 3.5mm headphone jack and the micro SD. I think it does really well. The camera on the Poco F3, I will have to give that credit, it does a little bit better, and I do think that the design of the Poco F3 is slightly better as well. But with that being said, the Moto G100 is a really solid performer, and if you want a phone that does well in day-to-day life, if you want that CPU based phone, the Moto G100 is definitely a phone I would recommend. Either way, let me know what you think about this review, and of course if you did enjoy it, don't forget to leave a like because it really does help out a video, especially if you just drop a like and leave a comment below, it really does help out. If you aren't subscribed, also don't forget to do that one if you enjoy my content. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed and have a good one, and talk to you guys in the next.